back to the Crimson Creed podcast. Sam and Chris here. Friday before Oklahoma plays against the Cougars of BYU in Provo, Utah. Chris, how you feel going into the weekend?
Feeling pretty good. I really liked what I saw out of OU last week. Really liked seeing USC lose again. I really liked seeing OU's offense put up one of their best performances of the season, their best performance in conference play. Our defense looked the way they did at the beginning of the season. It's just it was a good game to watch.
God, it was. It was a heck of a rebound game for Webby and Dylan Gabriel, especially. The defense has given up a few plays here and there this year, but overall been a lot cleaner. The offense was what I think people across the board really wanted to see kind of drum back up to beat on Saturday. So fantastic to see that happen.
Definitely.
Got a good slate of games this weekend. We're playing at BYU, obviously. BYU's sitting at 5-5. Arizona and Utah, I think coming into the season, most people would have favored Utah on the initial lines by 15, 20 points. Seeing the way the season's played out, both those teams sitting at 7-3, and Arizona being a 1-point favorite at home against the Utes. That's interesting. We've got OU on the upswing, ready to swing back into things. Who are you really looking at this week to have a big week?
I'm thinking it's going to be Gavin Sawchuk. In the preseason, we talked a lot about having high hopes for Gavin Sawchuk, and he came into the season injured, which really kept him from playing to his full potential. But lately, he's been healthy, and it showed. In his entire career at OU, there have been 3 games where he's had the ball, where he's been given the ball at least 10 times. Florida State last year, Oklahoma State this year, West Virginia this year. Can you tell me what he had in common in those 3 games other than having at least 10 carries?
Probably at least had a touchdown in each game.
He did. Actually, no, he did not against West Virginia. But he did have at least 100 yards in every one of those games. Florida State, he had 15 carries for 100 yards. West Virginia, 22 carries for 135 yards. I can't remember the exact stat line against Oklahoma State, but he had over 100. Basically, it shows that where he might be slow to get off, once you really start giving him the ball, he's going to break loose. He's really strong. He's kind of the perfect mix of a power back and a speed back. I look for him to have a good game, especially with how weak the BYU defense is. I mean, West Virginia, we talked last week about how they have one of the more solid defenses in the Big 12. And what did he do against them? Like I said, 22 carries for 135 yards. This is a BYU team that does not have a good defense. We've seen them have good defenses in recent years, not this one. They are one of the worst defenses in the Big 12 total and against the run. They're one of the worst in the country against the run in terms of getting into the backfield, in terms of getting tackles for a loss. Given how he's played the past couple weeks, I'd look for Gavin Sawchuk to just go off.
Yeah, and where I think we're going to have some real promise coming into this week too. Obviously, Sawchuk's going to be huge. Tawi Walker rotating in there. I'm sure he'll make an impact. But Dylan Gabriel, I don't think anybody would dispute that his and probably most quarterbacks' best throws come when they have time to throw the ball, when they're not just being rated. BYU gets no sacks. Through 10 games on the year, they have 9 sacks. They're averaging less than 1 per game. They don't have a very talented defensive line, like you said. And 9 sacks through 10 games. That's a
and our offensive line has only given up 13 through 10 games. Last year at this point, I think they had given up 31.
Yeah. So Dylan Gabriel, he's going to have a lot of time to work. I don't know how much of that lack of sacks is maybe just dropping 7 or 8 guys into coverage. And so they're just rushing with a minimal defensive line. So potentially Dylan Gabriel will have to just pay attention really to where he's throwing the ball, make sure he's putting it in just the right spot so we don't sail over anyone, throw them short. But after what I saw last week and what I think we've seen most of this season from Gabriel, you know, we had 2 weeks there that were a little rough from the play calling and the execution standpoint. But when you look at last week and you look at the rest of the season as a whole, very little to be concerned about there for Oklahoma fans. I don't see how we get out of this game without torching BYU.
I agree with you there. You know, their pass defense actually isn't too bad. If I remember correctly, they give up less than 250 yards a game through the air, so that's not too bad. But like you said, they don't really have the most talented defense, and where Dylan Gabriel succeeds is when he has all day to throw it. And you know, we've seen recently that he has a lot of trust in the offensive line. Take a look at last week. That long touchdown pass he had to Drake Stoops, where 41 of the yards were after the catch. I went back and I watched that play a few times, and to say he trusts his offensive line is an understatement. In there, it appeared like the pocket was collapsing. That's what it looked like. None of the offensive linemen were anywhere near where they started, but he was still just hanging out in the pocket. He wasn't trying to run around. He had no thought at all of, I'm about to get sacked or I need to run. He just has complete trust in his team. And that offensive line is going to do pretty well, I believe, against the West Virginia defensive line, because the BYU defensive line. And here's why. In the past 5 games, the BYU defense has given up 44 points to TCU. They gave up only 14 to Texas Tech, so that's not too bad. Followed by giving up 35 to Texas, 37 to West Virginia, and 45 to Iowa State. The same Iowa State team that we held to 20 points, much like we did West Virginia last week. BYU, they really struggle defensively this year. And I think that's going to play a big role in how this game goes this coming Saturday, or I guess that would be tomorrow, because we've got an offense that's number 4 in the country in terms of points per game in OU, and they've really found their rhythm. And then you've got BYU, who I don't even know if Keaton Slavis, their starting quarterback, is going to be in tomorrow. So it's going to be really interesting to see what BYU has planned for us, but I can't imagine it's going to be very successful, whatever it is.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, Chris, the one win they have in their last 4 or 5 games, they scored like 27 points, something like that.
Yeah, it was to Texas Tech. They won 27-14. Their highest scoring game of the season was against
their one win. I mean, they couldn't even get to 30.
Yeah. Now they did score over 30 against Cincinnati, and kind of their marquee win on the season, they scored 38 against Arkansas. But against other conference opponents, the last 3 games combined, let me do the math here, they've scored 26 total points in the past 3 games. Past 3 games, they're not even averaging 10 points a game.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yeah, it just takes one Saturday sometimes for a team to turn things around a little bit. But I just got the Mr. Pibb there, I see. Didn't know you were a Pibb drinker.
You know, I got some because one of my friends up here, he really likes Mr. Pibb, and we're going to have them over. So I decided to get a 12-pack and give it a try. And, you know, it's not bad. You know how they describe what the soda tastes like? Spicy cherry. You ever thought about that when drinking a Pibb or a Dr. Pepper?
No. Pibb is usually my drink of choice at the movie theater. But yeah, I don't have it. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, BYU's defense, it leaves a lot to be desired. Assuming things hold the way that they have the last few weeks, OU's going to be okay. I don't know, though, that we cover the 24.5 point spread. That is a lot of points, a whole lot of points, even for this offense to cover that amount. That's, we won by 39 last week, I guess. It's not out of the realm
And,
of possibility.
and we were only what, like a 16-point favorite last week or something like that? See
Yeah.
here, 13 and a half, 13 and a half. I just pulled it up on ESPN. But don't forget, OU in their 10 games this year, they've covered the spread 7 times, 6 in their victory. All first, I cannot seem to find my words. All 6 of their first 6 games, they covered the spread, including the game against Tulsa, Texas. They covered the spread last week against West Virginia. And this team is rocking and rolling again. I wouldn't be surprised to see them cover it all.
Well, I'll tell you what was surprising was the Denver Nuggets.
Oh, here we go.
They're hosting the Dallas Mavericks recently for part of the in-season tournament. And Dallas Mavericks are out in a shoot around out there pregame. And Grant Williams talking about it feeling slightly off out there on the new court. And I don't know if you've seen it, but the NBA for their in-season tournament this year rolled out some really bright, very loud special courts for this in-season tournament. And you think they've made enough of these courts. They know how to build them, right? Grant Williams knows something feels off. So he approaches the equipment staff, the league staff there that's at that game, and gets them to measure the 3-point line because he felt like he was shooting from too far out when he was shooting these threes, even though he was just past the line. Turns out they had the line about 7 inches too far out from where it needed to be.
That is egregious.
Yeah, because that's half a foot, and it's just something to me to see a league, a whole sports league that makes so many of these courts and lives and dies by distance have that kind of trouble. And you want to live and die by distance, you're going to be Danny Stutzman. Danny Stutzman covers the field. He closes these gaps so fast. We saw it a little bit against West Virginia, where every play on that first and second drive, I think Stutzman was in there. And you talk about having distance, having range, being a very long defender. He's going to be my breakout player this week. He's obviously been a huge factor this year. He hit a little bit of a slump there when he got injured, wasn't in, obviously. And he had a good game last week. I think he really breaks out this week. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say Stutzman gets a turnover. He's going to get an interception on a short pass, or he's going to force a fumble and get it. But he's getting a turnover. I don't know if you saw, but the OU Twitter account, OU football, X account, whatever. They've said we have a no-fly zone now back in our secondary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody's called Oklahoma a no-fly zone in a long time. Since the days of Brandon Everidge, Derek Strait, Rodney Poole, a lot of those guys. It's been a minute. Who's your breakout player this week on the defensive side?
On the defensive side, I'm gonna say it comes down to a couple players. If he's healthy, if PJ Adibaware is playing, then we are very likely going to see him have a breakout game. He hasn't played too much lately. I think he's been hurt. When he has played this year, he's shown brilliance, but we'll kind of see what happens. It depends on if he's healthy. If he's not playing too much, I'm going to say Peyton Bowen. Peyton Bowen, he's been a monster. You were talking about Danny Stutzman covering the field like no one's business. So does Peyton Bowen. And one thing that Peyton Bowen really brings to our secondary is he hits hard. He's not like a lot of these defensive backs we've had over the years that certain coaching staff who shall not be named told them not to not to hit the receiver too hard or anything like that. I mean, you see Peyton Bowen diving after people, doing his best to make sure they know who's daddy. And he's kind of contributed to that no-fly zone. While he doesn't have an interception on the year, he has a couple near interceptions. He has a couple deflections. He has quarterback pressure that's kept him from doing anything. For those who don't know, Oklahoma, the reason we're calling him a no-fly zone, the reason OU's calling him a no-fly zone is because through 10 games, we've allowed a grand total of 10 touchdown passes. That's one per game, but we have intercepted 17 passes. No one in the country has intercepted more passes than Oklahoma. We've got Gentry Williams back there, who's just been a monster as of late, has 3 interceptions on the year. We've got Peyton Bowen, who shuts down people in coverage. We've got Billy Bowman, who hits hard, makes interceptions, makes plays. But Peyton Bowen, I think he is going to be our breakout player this week. It's just, and kind of going off what you were talking about with Danny Stutzman, when he went down at halftime against Kansas, and then when he was out against Oklahoma State, we were sitting there wondering, well, just how much of a difference would he have made in these 2 games? Would OU have potentially won those games if he was in there? And we really saw the difference he makes when he's out there on the field. You do not run past Danny Stutzman. If he touches you, you are going down. Yeah. It's insane what he's doing for our defense this year. I really hope he comes back for first year in the SEC.
I think he's got a lot of reason to. I'm sure he feels probably like he's still got something to prove. And getting to do that in the best conference in football, that's got to be a real advantage, I would think. Tomorrow's November 18th, Chris. Saturday, November 18th. 12 years ago on tomorrow's date. Do you remember what happened in the Big 12?
12 years ago on tomorrow's date.
November 18th, 2011.
Was that the year that was the year? Was that the game where Iowa State knocked Oklahoma State out of the national championship race?
It was. That's a good memory. And that was at Jack Trice Stadium in Ames, Iowa. The Cyclones have a chance to do it again this weekend, 7:00 on Fox, hosting the number 7 ranked Texas Longhorns. Longhorns obviously not as close to a for sure championship right now as OSU was at that point, being ranked number 2. But Texas is a 1-loss team with the win over the flagship SEC program that is Alabama. That is a game with a lot of there's a lot riding on it for Texas. And if Iowa State wins that this week, and assuming everybody else wins out except Iowa State, OU would play Kansas State in the Big 12 title game here in a couple of weeks. Do we think that's more likely to happen with Iowa State Iowa State beating Texas? Or do you think Houston at 4-6 is more likely to hold their own against a team that just got blown out 45-3 in Orlando by the mighty Golden Knights of UCF? How are we getting this championship berth?
Houston, they played really well against Texas. Oklahoma State appeared last week to have dipped back into how they looked at the beginning of the season when they had no offense. I could see it either being a close game where Houston's battling with Oklahoma State the whole time, or we're going to see Oklahoma State look how they were for a while and start running Houston into submission and beat them by 30 points. It's either going to be a close game with Houston pulling it out, or Oklahoma State's going to blow them out. I don't see any other scenario there. But
do you know if they're going to have Ollie Gordon back?
I don't. I will look that up here in just a minute.
But he got hurt there in the rain against UCF.
Something to note about that Texas versus Iowa State game tomorrow. Iowa State is going to be one of the best defenses that Texas has faced this season. In terms of yards per game, they are the number 1 defense in the Big 12. They only allow 204.3 yards per game.
That's
You
not
know,
bad.
you know, OU and the Big 12, they've really had a reputation over the recent years for being or for having a lot of bad defenses. And I'm sorry, that's 204.3 passing yards per game. I'm sorry, 204.3 passing yards per game. But the Big 12 has already had a reputation for having bad defenses. A lot of the air defense in the Big 12 is pretty solid. Of all the teams in the Big 12, there's one team that allows more than 250 passing yards per game. That's Oklahoma State. They allowed 255.4.
Oddly, I was going to guess BYU.
uh, the BYU, they're actually allowing 233.5, so that's not bad. Iowa State also, in terms of just total yardage, number one in the Big 12 in defense, allowing 329 yards per game, but Texas is number two at 337. Iowa State, they're going up against the number one rushing defense in Texas, but Iowa State has the number three. In terms of points per game, Iowa State is number four in the conference, allowing 19.9 points a game. Texas number one at 18.4. There's just a whole lot of intrigue around this matchup, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Something that Texas is going to have to do is rely on Quinn Ewers to score touchdowns, not just throw the ball downfield and get it close, but they're going to need him to actually throw touchdown passes because Jonathan Brooks, the running back who their offense lives and dies with, is out for the season with a torn ACL. Quinn Ewers, this season, after only sitting out like 2.5 games total, I think, that's still 7.5 games, has 14 total touchdown passes with 4 interceptions. He will get all the yards you could ever want in a game, but he won't turn it into points. And their next running back up, I was talking with a Texas fan earlier, against OU and Alabama combined, if I remember my numbers correctly, it was like 18 rushes for like 49 yards, I think. Yeah, 18 rushes for 49 yards
For
against
Brooks?
Alabama and Oklahoma combined. I think his last name is Baxter. I think it's CJ Baxter.
Okay,
But
gotcha.
Jonathan Brooks is the one who went out for the season with the ACL. They're really going to have to rely on Quinn Ewers to dominate with his arm. And against a passing defense as good as Iowa State's, which barely allows 200 passing yards a game, they're going to have their work cut out for them. On top of that, you've got a Texas defense who struggles with coverage from time to time, and an Iowa State quarterback who can throw accurate passes. He has a quick delivery. He threw 2 touchdown passes against us, which is one more than Quinn Ewers threw against us. But it's a really interesting game. One other thing for your memory this time. Yesterday was November.
This is always going to be a fun game. You try to test my memory.
Yesterday, November 16th, was the 4-year anniversary of what significant football game?
That would have been 2019, probably the 28-3 comeback against Baylor, led by Mr. Jalen Hurts.
That was it. And so let's say hypothetically tomorrow, Quinn Ewers finds himself losing 28-3 against the Cyclones.
They're in the championship.
Does he have what it takes to win, or is that going to be another C+ effort from Texas?
I just think no matter what Quinn Ewers does tomorrow, I think Texas is rendered a little bit one-dimensional. Quinn Ewers is not the kind of quarterback that's really built to be in a one-dimensional game. He can only hold off a defense for so long through the air. So Iowa State comes out on top on that one. More importantly, back to our game real quick. I'm going to take OU in this one. I think you got to take OU. I think we hit the half 100 mark again, a little more convincingly this time. I've got us 55-10 over BYU.
I don't think we'll score that many because BYU, they kind of live and die with the run. They do not have a quarterback who can dominate through the air.
That's exactly why we dominate them, though. We've got one of the highest stuff rates
we do
in the country, and I think you're going to see a lot of 3-and-outs against BYU and our offense getting the ball back fast.
I agree, but when BYU does find success, they are going to milk the clock. they're going to take as much, they're going to have a very similar game plan to what UCF had. Because UCF, we stuffed them for the first quarter, but then they figured something out. We eventually figured it out early into the second half, and we shut it down for the rest of the game. But it was enough to let UCF get into the game and stay in the game for pretty much the rest of the game. So BYU, they are going to try their best to find a way to run through our defense. And when they find success on the ground, they're going to take as much time off the clock as they can. I don't think they'll find that much success, but I think they'll find enough to where we don't have the ball as much as we'd like to. I have a final score prediction of 42-6. They will get towards the red zone. They will not find the end zone.
Is that a touchdown and a missed extra point, or is that 2 field goals and we keep them out of the end zone?
2 field goals, no touchdowns. They will not find the end zone tomorrow.
Bold. That's bold.
I mean, their defenders will find the end zone quite a bit, but their offense, not so much.
Oregon State and Washington tomorrow, playing in Corvallis. The Beavers hosting the 5th-ranked Huskies, who, against really all odds, based on the way that they've played in the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, are sitting at 10-0, which is really something to me. I think the Beavers put an end to Michael Penix's journey through this season. I think you're going to see DJ Uiagalelei really shine out there on the national stage. That's the primetime ABC game. Do you see that game going differently?
I do. Michael Penix, the reason he's towards the top of the Heisman conversation is because he's got ice in his veins, for lack of a better phrase. He's a heck of a quarterback. He's been able to lead game-winning drives time and time again. And despite how his defense has played, and sometimes despite how his offense has played, he's found a way to win these games. I mean, look at the Oregon game. He kind of got hurt in the second half, and it looked like Oregon was taking control of the game. Next thing you know, he leads them on like a 3 or 4 play drive down the field that scores a touchdown through the air. USC, he had to be ready to score 50 points in that game to win, and he did. He scored 52. The offense did. Now, of course, a lot of that was due to the ground game, but still, he was quite successful through the air. He was able to overcome the challenge that was the Utah Utes defense. Despite barely being able to do anything against Arizona State, he found a way to pull that game out. He keeps finding ways to win. And Oregon State, DJ Uiagalelei, he has not been as consistent as Penix has been. In the biggest games of Uiagalelei's career, he has come up short, to put it nicely. That's one of the reasons he transferred out of Clemson, was because he knew he was going to get replaced. So I think Washington is going to pull that one out. Now, in the Apple Cup next week, when they play Washington State, that one should be fun to watch. But no, I don't think Oregon State can beat Washington.
Yeah, Uiagalelei, he's not far off from Dylan Gabriel. He's 5 touchdowns away from having an identical stat line there. He's sitting at 20 touchdowns and 4 picks on the year. So I definitely give him a little more credit there. But we'll see how it goes. I've got the Beavers in a tight one. This has been the Crimson Creed podcast, Sooner Pocket podcast.
There we go.
Yeah, get used to the new name. We're humans. This has been the Sooner Pocket podcast. I'm Sam along with Chris here. Let's look forward to a victory this weekend against the BYU Cougars. Hope we pull this one out and maybe err on the side of the 55-10, more so than just dropping 42 points. Don't you like that? Just dropping 42. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll look forward to talking to you next week.